Tonight, Hillary Clinton kicking off her campaign in Iowa, and it looks like she's looking back to her New York Senate race, hoping to win back that winning formula. Then, the push in our area to prevent employers from checking credit reports and criminal records before they hire people. Makes it easier for those folks to get a job, but could that come back to haunt those companies? Also, God's bankers, an investigation of money and power at the Vatican. My interview with top journalist Mr. Posner, who spent 9 years getting to the bottom of it all. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Tonight we will begin with a race for the White House, and of course, we start with Hillary Clinton's campaign. Still getting used to that music. Hillary kicked off her campaign today with a small roundtable at a community college in Iowa. Continued selling the message about income inequality. Take a listen for yourself.
As you look across the country, the deck is still stacked in favor of those already at the top. And there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong when CEOs make 300 times more than the typical worker.
Now, if anybody knows about a successful campaign for Hillary Clinton, it's the folks in New York. We had a front row seat to that campaign when she ran for the Senate in 2000. And this presidential run resembles that race a lot more than her 2008 campaign. Back then, she started out with a ton of criticism. She was called a carpetbagger, if you remember, and a whole lot worse. But she turned a lot of those cynics into converts. And she's going to try and do that now. But the question is, will the American people buy what she's selling? I want to bring in our panel right now. Former Queens Congressman Bob Turner. He won after the resignation of Anthony Weiner, and he also is a candidate for the U.S. Senate back in 2012. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Journal News columnist Phil Reisman and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And Phil, I start with you because we were talking about the campaign, and I said, you know, I remembered listening to her. I remember complaining about listening to her, but I remember the skepticism that came in when she was running for office in New York. And not just that she parachuted in here, but I will tell you, and I'll tell folks, the amount of Republican assemblymen and state senators and county execs who say, forget Republican or Democrat, she returns my phone calls. She actually does stuff on the constituent side. I know that's more retail politics than what she's talking about now, but you remember the cynicism about it, and what she did in 2000, it was a whole lot different than the campaign she ran for president in 2008. I get the vibe she's going to try and turn back the clock a little bit.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the listening tour. Everybody's copied that ever since, including Republicans like our good friend Rob Astorino ran, who started to count how many counties he'd been in. Yeah, I mean, she's trying a different tactic this time, and I think she knows her strength is basically one-on-one kinds of interactions. She's not a good speaker, I don't think, in terms of, you know, being in front of a big crowd. But it was interesting to see that, you know, that lead in where she's around a table of, you know, just a handful of people, and she's very good that way. I mean, she really is. I mean,
have you got the handle on the messaging part? What they consciously said, both in terms of that 2-minute video we talked yesterday. She said I think 5 times. She said it 30-something times.
Well, you know the Onion slogan, "I deserve this." Well, that's you know, even any kind of pretense of trying to even, you know, reinforce that stereotype of the way she was in 2008 is, or 2008 is pretty much out the window. Now it's all about everyday people. It's the middle class, although they don't use that phrase, middle class.
No, but Andrew, to the point that Phil just touched on, a lot of the criticism from the progressives to try and get in Elizabeth Warren or others is, we don't want a corporate candidate here. We want somebody who's going to care about the middle class and the working poor in this country, and those left behind in the recovery. She's done everything from the announcement to where she went today to the messaging and some specifics even she laid out to try and say, I'm your candidate.
Yeah, she was talking about college tuition and embracing President Obama's college tuition program that would be free. Talked about consumer protection. Talked about consumer protection, dinged Wall Street a little bit. And this is somebody who, her critics on the progressive left would say has more in common with Wall Street than with Mitt Romney than necessarily with Bill Clinton. So she's catering the message and trying to find the message that works right now. She's playing to the Democratic field and trying to unite the Democratic base, keep other challengers away. And so she's hitting the hot button issues of the day, at least when it comes to progressive economic messages.
Dom, you think people are going to buy what she's selling? In that people want the genuine article, I think. Forget Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. People are tired of, the old caricature of a politician with a, they want to know what you think. And she's trying to sound more relatable, going to Chipotle and all the rest. I know it's stupid, retail stuff. But the point is, it's all done with a strategy in mind. You think people buy it?
Yes. To use your word, you use the word retail twice. And that's what, as you well know, what Iowa is all about. Retail politics, going to those diners, one by one. They don't generally, and I say this having been there numerous times, they don't like necessarily the big events. They like the one-on-one contact. And so I really believe that thus far, because it's very early in her campaign, that Hillary Clinton has learned from 2008. It's always my contention that the clock ran out on her. It wasn't that she was a bad candidate. Obama came out of nowhere. She didn't know how to respond to him, and then the clock ran out in terms of the primary. So I think Americans are buying it thus far, Richard. It remains to be seen, but thus far she's off to a good start.
Bob, how would you say if Republicans said, hey, you might have a better view of her than maybe we did from the New York days, where is she underestimated by Republicans, and where do you think she's most vulnerable?
Well, she's not constrained with any real ideology. I think if you were selling a bar of soap, you would find out what people like, and you would then accent that ingredient, the smell, the bouquet.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing right now. The spin doctors are the PR people. And I think she will emerge with a message. Now, she's a polarizing figure. I don't think there's a big undecided with Hillary. And she's got a 25-year history that will be pounded away on explaining, what we got here. And it's not this packaging, it's not this bouquet.
Okay, but take that 5 to 10% of Americans, because you're right.
That'll be
that 5 to 10% is going to
difference.
decide it. And those folks in Iowa, we can even tell, Ohio, the counties, and Florida, and we can go through the map. We know how it works. In fact, we got if you want to even look at a map right now, in terms of where people are projecting, already they got locked up in terms of the leaning states here, Bob, 240 votes roughly in terms of Democrats. She's only got to get another 30 or so in those swing states. To that end, how does that 5+% of Americans, how can they be swung the other way against Hillary? Is it something that comes out, or is it just convincing her that, haven't you tried this before?
I think as far as the Democratic primary is concerned, we would concede that. That's
You're not going
done.
on a limb there, my friend.
Right. We're talking about
Yeah.
the big
general, yeah.
the race in 16, and that's where that 5, maybe 10% have to be sold or enlightened.
All right. Well, that helps a perfect segue, and I'll stay with you, which is for that 5 to 10% of Americans to say, you know what, I'll pick the other item here on the shelf, whoever emerges out of the primary process for Republicans. The question is, and you had a front row seat to this, will the culture wars that Republicans just can't seem to avoid engaging in, right? Will it again define them as a party? I mean, think about what we've seen here in the last month. We had everything from what happened in Indiana with the religious freedom. We've had debates about immigration. Every time a Republican wants to say, open up the tent a little more, they got a fight on their hands. Abortion is on the ballots in state after state right now. I don't know why, as a party politically, take ideology out of it, it's in their best interest to fight these fights when people care about pocketbook stuff. And if you're in that 5 or 10%, Bob, you don't want to hear somebody, refight Roe v. Wade or be the party that's against gay marriage and everything else. It's not a winning formula.
You couldn't be more right.
How do you convince them?
Well, I think both the Democrats and the media push those issues.
Nobody forced the Republicans in Indiana to go with the religious freedom stuff, right? I had nothing to do with that.
They have to, if they're serious about winning, we Republicans, we have to stay on the core issues, the economy and national interest and defense.
You know, Richard, it's interesting today that Chris Christie came out and talked about reforming Social Security, which is completely getting off the subject of, culture stuff. And, he's a moderate, I guess.
Where was he? Iowa or New Hampshire?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, yeah. Coincidentally, right?
So, I mean, there you go, right there. There's one Republican who's probably in the single digits, I guess, if anything, barely 1%
But Bush
on
showed
the
a
radar
poll a
screen.
second ago, Phil.
Yeah.
Do you think, and it's a perfect example, look at New York even, okay? I mean, Rob Astorino had an uphill challenge, any Republican trying to win statewide office with how it works, but you can't get through to the general unless the conservative line basically blesses you.
Right.
So
they're pandering to their base.
You
That's what
got
they're
it.
doing.
And do
Yeah.
you think
They're
down
all
deep
doing it.
most Republicans say to themselves after Romney and McCain, you know what, twice. I went for a guy I didn't really love here, the conservative base, but I went along to go along. What did it get me? I'd rather lose but have him pass the purity test than win and be a sellout. What do you I mean, I get the vibe from some conservatives that they just want a real red meat guy. They don't want anything where they back down on the social issues or anything else.
It is interesting, I mean, that some of them are trying to nuance a lot of this stuff. Like Rand Paul is an interesting example because he's a libertarian. So he's trying to say, I'm an all-inclusive, he's playing the game, saying, I want to get African Americans under my tent, and I want to,
but I want to make the restaurants feed them if they don't want to, though. I mean, he also said that.
Well, I know, and then somebody asks him, how do you feel about, gay
Civil
marriage
Rights
and
Act,
things like that? Yeah, I know. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to at least he is, and maybe some others are trying to, move into a different, I don't know, nuanced kind of campaign without coming across necessarily.
But conservatives will come home to whoever the Republican nominee is just because it's the lesser of two evils, if that's the case. The same
They
way
still
that-
got to get through the primary.
The same way
Andrew.
the people to the left of Hillary Clinton will come home and vote for her. I mean, the enthusiasm might be down.
And
but
don't forget,
it's not going too far in the primaries to make yourself unelectable.
Yeah, and don't forget, in Hillary's case, there's no Barry Sanders throwing his head, he's not going to, I don't think, yet. Elizabeth Warren, I think, is already.
I don't think that's going to happen, but
I don't believe it either.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
there may be one.
Right.
But
person
is there
emerge, but-
is there a way to stop the primary process from going so far to the right, especially in the Republicans' case, that it doesn't hurt the nominee in the long run?
Well, that's part of the nature of the beast. And remember, Hillary lost last time to someone running on her left. The Republicans have the same challenge on the right. We may have 14 candidates. Now, many of them would be single issues. Rick Santorum, great guy, once primary social issue. That's not going to be a real factor, I don't
Does that
think.
14 include Donald Trump, by the way?
It might.
Always,
It
always.
might.
At this stage,
Always.
he's always in.
Yeah.
And
But how do you stop a Santorum from derailing the primary process to the
he-
point
he-
where it hurts
he
the
won't-
party?
He won't. He wants to get his message out there and be
But you know where
heard
the trouble
and
I always
sell
thought
votes.
was? Remember in those debates, very few people watch, but we watched the highlights of it. And the moderator would say, everybody raise their hand if they believe states should create religious exemptions for it. So all of a sudden they look around, and the other of the 12 dwarves instead of the 7 dwarves, the guys shoot their hands up. And then you're seeing if you're Jeb Bush or whatever, you're like, I better raise my hand. I want to be the one guy, then that's the story or whatever else. And we laugh. But in a way, that's how they get boxed in. So what giving states' rights in the debate turns out the next day in, fairly, I think, saying they don't want to give gays equal protection or whatever. And then they're on defense. It's like, do you want to win? Or do you want to, refight the same fights that you've been having on social issues that make it tough to get elected, right?
That is one of the challenges. But as an open race, we're going to have what we have and sort it out.
I thought the Kochs are the Koch brothers are trying to prevent that stuff.
I think this election is going to be all about, the middle class. It's going to be all about income inequality, and I think the Republicans are going to try to figure out a way, as Chris Christie said today, talk about hard truths. All that other stuff. Don't worry about it. We got to talk about.
Well, you're talking about that 5%, right, Phil? That they're looking for a reason to tip either way. And if they've got a gay son or whatever, then that makes it tough. All right, we'll jump to a quick break. Now, I'm really curious where the table's going to come down on this one. If you got poor credit, you could have a poor chance of landing a job. This isn't a news flash to some of you. Same thing goes if you've got a criminal record. But there is movements in cities across the state of New York as well as across this country here to make it tough for employers to have a right to check on that stuff as it relates to you. The question is that good or bad for business? We'll be right back.